Often our first impressions are lasting ones. Everything we do and everything we say, including our nonverbal communication, our facial expressions, they have an impact on the relationships that we make. And there are only three possible reactions that a person can have to you. One, they will not remember you at all, or two, they'll have a negative opinion of you, or three, they'll have a lasting positive feeling about you. And as Christians, it should be obvious which one is expected of us. So laugh with me as I share a funny and memorable story to illustrate the point of making a good impression that will last. So back in 1980, I was beginning a career in financial services, and I had just completed a 6-month training and licensing program from a large and reputable insurance company. By the fall of that year, I was ready to schedule appointments to serve the needs of existing clients who no longer had an insurance agent to serve them. And this was my first sales call. It was Thanksgiving week in mid-Michigan. The weather had turned cold and already some snow was in the air. I had made the 30-minute drive to the client's very small home in the country near Clarkston, Michigan. Of course, I was wearing a suit and tie, carrying a briefcase, and ready to serve. It was my first time meeting these clients, and Mr. Tim greeted me at the front door of the tiny one-bedroom home. After shaking hands, he invited me inside. Right away, I noticed a couple of things. First, there was a strong odor of freshly baked cookies and pies, and secondly, it was very warm inside. Mr. Tim said, "I'm sorry about the heat, but my wife's been baking all day to get ready for a family gathering at her parents' house, and the oven makes the house pretty hot. Feel free to take off your jacket," he said. Then he led me to the kitchen to meet his wife, and Mrs. Nancy was cheerful, covered in flour, and sweating from the work and the heat. The kitchen table was covered in baked goods. There were several types of cookies, several different kinds of pies, and fresh bread baking in the oven. It smelled wonderful. But I sort of needed the kitchen table to conduct the business. Mr. Tim suggested that he could get the folding card table and set that up in the living room. That sounded fine to me, and so that's what he did. And he set up the table in front of the couch where they could sit, and he pulled over the piano bench for me to sit on. We all sat down, and I opened my briefcase. We spent about an hour or so going over their finances and insurance needs. I was sweating heavily. At the time, I was well over 300 pounds, and I was wearing a suit and tie, which made me quite warm. But it was a warm conversation, too, and I enjoyed meeting these good folks. When it came time to pack up and leave, I closed my briefcase, and I went to stand up. But the piano bench was stuck to my backside. Mr. Tim noticed my concerned expression, and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, the piano bench is stuck to my butt." And he said, "Just hold it down with your hands and stand up," which I did. So I held that bench down, and I literally peeled myself off that bench, which was accompanied by the loud, wrenching sound that seemed like the tearing of fabric. I put my hands back on my butt to check, and I was so relieved to know that my pants were still there and my backside wasn't hanging out in the breeze. As I moved to the left away from the bench, I noticed a shocked expression on both of their faces, and they were staring at that piano bench in disbelief. When I got clear and I turned to look, I was horrified to see the imprint of my backside on their piano bench. You know how it is when you take a hot beverage like a coffee cup and leave it on a wood table for too long, and then when you remove the cup, it leaves a white mark? Well, there on that piano bench was exactly that, in the perfect image of my butt, in glorious detail. It looked like one of those X-ray images, or like a photocopy of a person who sat naked on a copier to produce a black and white image. My first thought was, "Oh my God, my butt can't be that big." I was absolutely horrified. And then Tim and Nancy began to laugh. It was really funny to them, but highly embarrassing to me. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. But in the coming weeks, I continued to serve their insurance needs, and We sort of built a friendship. When I returned with their new policy a month or so later, that piano bench was still there and my butt print on prominent display. Mr. Tim said, "We have had such fun sharing this with our friends and family, telling them all about the time our insurance agent came to visit. We plan to get it refinished someday, but it's too fun, so we're keeping it like this for a while." Oh my Lord, you have no idea the thoughts and feelings going through my mind and heart in that moment. Yikes. For years afterward, I would receive a card from these people every year around Thanksgiving. So all of this story I share with you so that I can ask you a question. Let me ask you, what kind of an impression are you leaving behind? Well, in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47, we get to glimpse into the lives of those early Christians and see what kind of impression they were making on each other and on their neighbors. They loved and learned, encouraged and worshiped, and they shared. They had generous hearts. They loved their neighbor as themselves. Their relationships were making a lasting good impression on everyone in their community. And the result of all that is described in verse 47, saying, they had favor with all the people. And as a result of the impression they were leaving on others, God added to their number daily those who were joining them and being saved. So is it thus with you? What kind of an impression are you leaving? Does it attract people into a lasting relationship, or does it repel them from your presence? I invite you to consider and think about the impression that you are making. Make it a good one. Make it memorable. But maybe, don't leave your butt print on their piano bench.